All right, thank you for coming today. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the House General Appropriations Subcommittee. And we're here today to hear House Resolution 102 brought to us by Representative O'Neill. Representative O'Neill, Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And the Chair recognizes Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I especially appreciate you all being here. I know there's an important other meeting going on, and I sincerely appreciate you taking a few minutes out of that to deal with this most important matter as well. I bring before you House Resolution 102 for your consideration this morning. And actually, the subject of the resolution is a gentleman by the name of Robert Clark, who is also here with us today, and he's probably easiest identified by having the biggest smile in Atlanta, Georgia, over there, which to me is an incredible, absolutely incredible feature of goodness of this man. In 1981, a woman was abducted and raped and robbed, and that's a very, very sad event, but based on a bad description, or whatever you might want to call it, Mr. Robert Clark was prosecuted based on an identification by this lady, and sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. Throughout the entire process, he made proclamations of his innocence, and nevertheless was incarcerated in 1982, I think, May of 82, and has spent 4 years of his adult life in prison, until the folks with the Innocent Project found out that that his case was a candidate for DNA comparisons, and when they ran all of the very now sophisticated DNA test, it conclusively exonerated Mr. Clark of any guilt whatsoever based on this misidentification. And he was released, and all the charges against him were dismissed. And since his release, actually a couple of years ago, he went directly to work. He reattached with his family, and he actually works probably more hours than legislators, believe it or not. To use that as a comparison, I think he works about a 16-hour day. Since he's been back to work, he's been promoted twice, and he's excited every day to get up and go to work. He works in a very hard industry, the concrete industry. He works outside in all weather. If he has to wear a raincoat or a sweatsuit, he's out there working every day, and somehow or another musters up a big smile. And everybody he comes in contact with, he just makes their day. And I think a lesser man might be pretty bitter against the system than he is, because not to betray any of his secrets, but when he came out of incarceration, he came out with a pretty bad disease, hepatitis, which he contracted sometime during his incarceration, hepatitis C, which unfortunately makes him uninsurable by most traditional insurance plans. And that can be a very deadly disease if it's not treated, can be even if it is treated. So he's going to be dealing with that also the rest of his life. Before he was incarcerated, he'd only been able to avail himself at a very young age of an 8th grade education. So he's also got a mountain to climb as far as getting himself up to date in education. And just imagine if your world stopped in 1982, and to be out now, seeing the world as it is, having lost those 20-some-odd years in there, what a catch-up that would leave you with. But he has asked, and the folks at the Innocence Project have asked for compensation under our statute. This is not a precedent-setting event. We've done this several times before, as soon as last year. The Secretary of State's office is the one that oversees this operation, and Secretary of State Handel approved this, and her committee approved it unanimously for compensation. Mr. Clark's attorneys actually requested over $2 million for him, but when everybody reviewed the damages and to stay within precedent, even though the damages exceed actually even the $2 million threshold, in my opinion, as a lawyer. The reasonable amount of compensation in the view of all the committees that have looked at it is $1.2 million. And if you'll notice in your resolution there on the findings on the back, we have bifurcated the compensation. For $1 million of it will be payable in a 15-year annuity over time and inheritable by his family, which is very, very important to him. $200,000 of it is essentially earmarked for medical expenses and care, since he probably will not be able to obtain traditional indemnity insurance coverage. He's going to have to pay all of his own medical bills, and we hope that he'll be able to do so and continue, actually maybe augment the treatment he was receiving when he was incarcerated. So if I guess I'll just pause there, and if there are any questions, otherwise I would ask this committee's favorable consideration of this resolution so we can move it on up to the big committee and through rules and get it on the floor and do what we can to help this man get his life back together. And through this entire process, I want to close by saying he's never faulted a soul. Again, he harbors, that I can see, no bitterness against anyone. He's just grateful to his Lord and Master and to everybody with the Innocence Project and anybody else that he comes in contact with, that he's able to live the American dream now, which is live a free and unfettered life, and he's taken advantage of every second of that. So with that, I'll pause, and any questions? Otherwise, I would ask you all to consider this favorably.
Okay, thank you, Representative Neal. And I should say at this time, this meeting this morning is a hearing, and it's my intent and our plan to get back together in the morning at 8, I believe it's 8 o'clock in the morning, to take a vote on it. I wanted to, for the subcommittee members, Representative Neal had mentioned that we'd taken action similar to this previously. I did want to say that is true. That's one of the unique features of this particular subcommittee, the general subcommittee, that we do take up these compensation resolutions. We have compensation resolutions for a whole wide area of different issues. But anything that we've done, this subcommittee, or the General Assembly for that matter, has done in relation to this particular type of compensation resolution did not set a precedent. Anything we've done before, an amount of money or anything like that, did not set a precedent. Anything we do with this will not set a precedent for anything in the future. These are all to be taken up individually, looked at individually based on that particular resolution and the what's identified in there and the needs for that. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? This is the chance to ask any if you have. Yes, ma'am. Just push your button so I'll know what.
Time to get this out on the floor and voted on and over to the Senate this session. We're running close to time, and I just wanted to make sure that we don't waste any more of this man's time.
I hope so.
Yes, there's not. We can't, Representative Houston. We can't do anything. We will get it out of this subcommittee. If we get it out tomorrow, if this subcommittee passes it, nothing can be done then until the full Appropriations Committee meets again. And I've talked to Chairman Harbin, and there will be time to get it out and then to rules. So whether we get it out today, this afternoon, or tomorrow really doesn't make any difference, because it still has to go to a scheduled, or not necessarily scheduled, but has to go to the full Appropriations meeting before we can take any action there and get it onto the rules calendar. But yes, there is time. I think today is the I forget, 25th day, something like that. So there is still time. Yes. Are there any questions? Representative Smith.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Representative O'Neill. Just for clarification purposes, because I was one of the ones who signed on to this piece of legislation, so I'm obviously supportive of this. But for anyone listening and trying to understand the process, with the Department of Corrections I guess, disclaiming any claims against it. That is more because of the agency that it is and that it was not the jury processes. Just to clarify that for people listening to understand and why, in fact, it is that we're doing this review process. In looking at the documents here, I guess to give you a chance to look over everything, there was a claim against the Board of Corrections. Well, the Board of Corrections was not the jury process. The Board of Corrections is essentially just the prison. So the claim more comes to the state of Georgia, which is why we're going through this process. So I'm just saying I'm supportive of what's going on. I know sometimes it's very confusing for people who are watching us to figure out why, in fact, we're the ones who are reviewing this. But myself and several others definitely want to commend the gentleman and to say that we are the body to consider this, and it's important to me for one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I wanted to ask, on page 2, lines 12 through 14, I guess I have questions about that as far as we're taking up the resolution, the compensation resolution for Mr. Clark. And I guess I have questions about any obligation the state may have to his heirs. Could you comment on that?
Well, yeah, the actual payment is $1 million, and it's considered in Mr. Clark's best interest, given his status in life and maybe vulnerability, that it should be done on an annuity basis. So the theory is that the payment is vested. If he were paid $1 million, which is half of what he asked for, his family would wind up inheriting that anyway.
Okay.
And we did distinguish that from the medical coverage insurance for that very sole purpose. But the actual compensation resolution could be a lump sum. And if it were not going to be inheritable, I think his request would be a lump sum. But everybody that advocates for Mr. Clark feels like this is probably a safer methodology, and it's certainly less expensive on the state to do it that way. So there's a benefit in that for us. I would hate to exact a benefit for the state in a sense, because you have the time value of money there, and then make it punitive upon the claimant.
Okay,
any other questions?
Well, I'd just like to say, as a mother, I can see how the family suffered damages too. I mean, I know he suffered, but as a mother, and I see how the whole family suffered, and I'm sorry.
I've tried to find every way I know in the world to say I'm sorry to Mr. Clark and any member of his family or any of his friends, and I can't come up with enough different ways to say it.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Did anybody else want to speak on this? Okay.
No, thank you. Is it 8 o'clock tomorrow morning we're going to reconvene? Is that the plan? Or?
That is correct. I'll tell you the room number in a second if you want. She's got it here. .506. It is 8, right? 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Room 506.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you all for coming too. Thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.